And I'm not sure if one of my colleagues is coming from Solidarity. If they do, I'm not using 20 minutes. Thank the Minister for her presentation. And just to start on a positive note, a couple of things which I think should be welcomed is the extension of the hot meal scheme to 35,000 additional school children, an increase in the working lone parents' income disregard, although I don't think it's high enough, but that increase is welcome, and an increase in the hours that carers are allowed to work from 15 to 18.5. And one thing I would welcome, but I think most people would be astonished to think it didn't already exist, is that blind welfare allowance be disregarded in social welfare means assessment. I think a lot of people would be quite shocked to know that that wasn't the case hitherto. But there are some headlines on the budget worth mentioning. And Budget 2020 has been described by Social Justice Ireland as betraying the vulnerable. The poorest 30% will be hit the hardest, particularly with rising food costs due to Brexit. And while the poorest will see very little increase in their income as a result of the budget, Brexit will deliver, they reckon, an increase in the cost of living of between €892 and €1,360 per household per year. No mean feat indeed. The choices made by your government in Budget 2020, Minister, mean that vulnerable people will see their standard of living fall and they'll slip even further behind the rest of society. And that is a quote from Sean Healy of Social Justice Ireland. The research and policy analyst, Michelle Murphy, went on to say that the cost of living for the average Irish household will rise by that amount as a result of Brexit, and those on lower incomes will be the most exposed. So I want to take up three different issues. The first being the privilege that you seem to have to withhold the increase in the minimum wage. And you say that you withhold it to see how Brexit goes, with no hesitation on extending something like the Special Assignee Relief Programme. Not you, but the Minister for Expenditure, Public Expenditure and Reform, has extended this special relief programme for 1,000 executives who can cut their tax by 30% because they're high flyers that travel between various countries on business meetings. 8 of those earn between 3 and 10 million a year, and that tax rate will cost the state 28 million. So I think it's only fair for people out there and for everybody in this House to put your announcements in the context of the rest of the budget that was announced by the Finance Minister. Because top civil servants will have their pay reviewed, and probably your adviser stands to have a large pay increase, but there's no chance of that happening with the very lowest paid 137,000 of those who exist on the minimum wage. And it's worth saying that the vast majority of them are migrant workers, are women, are vulnerable people who work in the hospitality sector, whose profits have returned to greater than pre-2008 levels. They're seeing their profits soar throughout tourism and hospitality, and it is these people who are being held hostage because of the threat of Brexit. I think that we will be looking for a report from you as we face into the rest of the year on when and how this increase will be paid. And I also want to take up the question of lower rates of pay for job seekers allowance for young people. This is an effort for your government, I believe, to pretend that you're in the business of reversing the older austerity measures, and discriminatory measures at that. The outrageous attack on younger people as an austerity measure to lower the rate for under 25-year-olds will go, you say, and even lower the rates again for under 24-year-olds will go if they live independently. I have a question for you, Minister. How is anybody expected to live independently on €112 a week? That is beyond me. Maybe you can answer it. But recently I put a PQ to you to ask you how many people would be affected by this change. And as well as eulogising the measures that you've announced, that the age-related payment for under 25-year-olds would be abolished, that this measure would increase the personal rate for younger job seekers from €157.80 to €203 and will benefit 1,800 young people. That is the 1,800 young people who are 25 years old. You also eulogise the announcement that you increased the rate available to job seekers aged 18 to 24 who are living independently and in receipt of state housing supports, including rent supplement and HAP. Your department has estimated, and this is in your answer, that that affects around 300 young job seekers. So this announcement will affect around 300 people across the country. I don't believe it is worth making it a headline announcement as if there's some great achievement here. But you might also tell me how the numbers of 15 to 24-year-olds, there's something like 29,000 of them, who are unemployed in June of this year will benefit from this. It seems to me that when you calculate down through the figures, particularly the one that is supposed to help people who are under 24, if they live independently, is an overstatement, a gross overstatement, to make your department look good. The third thing I want to take up is the question of the fuel allowance. And having sat on the Climate Action Committee and really worked hard to demand a report on this, we got a resolution, a priority resolution, that said that the government would report on it. They didn't. They used MABS and Vincent de Paul and others' figures to show, and it is clearly shown by those organisations, that 28% of the population live in fuel poverty. And now an extra €2 a week for 28 weeks will be given on the fuel allowance, which amounts to €56 a year, to compensate them for a carbon tax increase that on the average gas bill would amount to about €60 a year. So please explain to me how you square the circle on this, because there's huge problems with it. Fuel and energy poverty is not just an issue for the 370,000 people who managed to qualify for fuel allowance, and we can show this very clearly, not just myself but deputies across the chamber, that this is an issue for many more hundreds of thousands of people. People on low income, on the minimum wage, on small private pensions, who get no help in dealing with increased carbon tax. And secondly, it won't even cover the total cost of that increase on the most vulnerable, because most of them live in poorly insulated homes in rural areas. They have to use coal, oil or gas for their heating. They cannot change their behaviour, and they cannot go green tomorrow because they're not being given the retrofitting, they're not being given the access to SEAI grants because they don't qualify for fuel allowance, or they haven't got a wad of money that they can upfront and then have it returned by the state. And believe me, there are so many ill people in that situation, old people and ill people, that this goes nowhere to address that. But they are facing punishment for the sins of the fossil fuel corporations with no effort by your department or this government to tackle it. So I will be seeking a report again on the levels of fuel poverty and how this increase will have an impact on those who you say it is intended for. Otherwise, I think those are the only three things I'd be looking for a report on your submission.